Aha! Hello, we meet again. And cheers to you all. What is this thing on screen? Oh my gosh, what a gnarly thing. Well, this is... it's going to be a representation of what we're going to be getting into. And before we get into it, the reason I do this kind of a workshop is I've often found that were they fried? Did you just eat them raw in the half shell with a little bit of lemon juice? Sierra Echo. As we've been introducing for maybe some or many of you out there, other role-playing games. You know, most of us have met through Dungeons and Dragons workshops and play and discovery and shared memories. This year's been a departure from that in many ways, as we've explored Cyberpunk Red, Alien RPG, Vampire the Masquerade, and now Call of Cthulhu. And while it is ultimately anecdotal evidence, it's anecdotal evidence from someone who's spent years in the trenches of a friendly local game store, watching people play, teaching people how to play games, facilitating them myself, going into forums and reading about thises and that's, talking with other people who are behind the counter. And I think that for many, running a D&D game is more known because there's maybe a greater consideration of the theme or generally what is supposed to happen. There's a rhythm that is that's there. And if there are those of you out there who haven't played a game outside of D&D, it's not that you can't learn the rules. The rules, especially the Call of Cthulhu, are pretty straightforward. It's a percentile system. Roll at or under your score in that skill or ability, and there you go. That's the basic of version, the quick version of it. But it comes down to, well, I've never read the Cthulhu books, so I don't know if I can really do any sort of long-term running of this game, let alone playing in the game, right? But there's extra pressure for people who run the game. Maybe you love the mechanics, but horror or mystery's just never really been your thing. And you don't have a lot of personal experience with it. Or you feel like there's some sort of a pressure on you that you need to actually, with your very first game that you've attempted to run of Call of Cthulhu, to write the next Lovecraftian novel with your game. And I want to dispel that broadly, not just with Call of Cthulhu. Yes, it's in the public, but it's kind of a branded thing. But with something like Cyberpunk or Alien, you might say, I've never seen the movies, so I'm not I don't know if I'd be able to run or play. It's just not my thing. And if I haven't seen the movies, I probably won't understand what's going on. When at the core of these systems, yes, there's a referential title. But just like with D&D, how many times have you played in a session of Dungeons and Dragons and there was neither a dungeon nor a dragon? Was it a shopping episode, a hot springs episode? Was it a you're on a ship and you're just sailing the seas, and yet you're still playing a game called Dungeons and Dragons. Well, shouldn't there be? Do you need xenomorphs in a game of Alien RPG? No. It's easy to include. Just like cosmic monsters and things like that are, pretty easy to include in a game of Call of Cthulhu. But you don't need to know, you don't need to be a fan of the source. You don't need to have the lines memorized. Like many of us might have Monty Python film lines memorized. And hopefully, as I present these other systems, and we've always concluded on how do you run a game of whatever. This week and this time, it's how do you run Call of Cthulhu? Maybe you've never run a horror game. Maybe you've never run a mystery, let alone trying to tie the two together. How can we build that confidence, that knowledge base, that you actually have what it takes to step up and to run a mystery in Call of Cthulhu? Also, hi, K Dolo. Traveler, if you wanted to play the TV show Firefly. Ivalon says, bring back the dungeons and the dragons. Yeah. It's those fun, simple moments like that, Miller. Not a dungeon nor a dragon in sight, but you all were in a storytelling game. And that's what Call of Cthulhu is. It's a storytelling game. So, how do you play the game? Not the rules and like the rolling mechanics. At least according to the people who wrote the rule book. What are some concepts you should be aware of that, if you want to brave getting behind the keeper's screen and facilitate a game? Chapter 10, Playing the Game. You ask me to explain why I am afraid of a draught of cool air, why I shiver more than others upon entering a cold room, and seem nauseated and repelled when the chill of evening creeps through the heat of a mild autumn day. Well, as usual with the exploration of this book, and not just the PDF here, but, the physical, actual, factual book. Not only do I own one, I sell them. I teach the game, and we're going to use a PDF as an educational tool and reference. And besides, I got this off of Drive-Thru-RPG, so, it's legal beagle. Anyway. Ivalon says, by the way, BT dubs, Cool Air is about the horrors of air conditioning. Being a keeper, and in other games, a DM, GM, or ST, storyteller, being the keeper can be immensely rewarding. You get to make a lot of decisions about what happens during the game, present the mystery to the players, and portray numerous non-player characters and monsters. You'll also be the final arbiter of how rules are applied, and this chapter contains advice and guidance intended to help you use those rules to best effect. Before reading this chapter, make sure you've read chapters 4 to 9, and those are things that we have gone over. Now, there is a lot here, which I'll bring up. It's in the book. I will reference it so that if it applies to you, you know it's here, and that you or this situation has been considered by the writers, and you can read it specifically. I'm going to get more to the nuts and bolts of presenting a game of Call of Cthulhu. If you're a new keeper, and not just to Call of Cthulhu, but to running a role-playing story, there's good advice here. When meeting prospective players for the first time, try to arrange to meet in a safe public space such as a cafe or bar, but don't give out your phone number or address to anyone until you get to know them. You might say, why? Maybe you're seasoned, or you just have common sense. That note is not for you, and that's fine. So there is, I guess, rudimentary advice for people who maybe this is their very, very, very first time role-playing. They went into a store, they saw it, they were brave enough to try something new in life. They picked it up and said, you know what, I've never done this before. Is there an etiquette? Is there a culture? Is there something? So often you will find notes or, very beginner advice. Plenty of forums will talk about it. There are things that maybe you out there say, you know what, that's not a bad idea. And there's probably things out there that you roll your eyes and you go, really? That almost feels insulting. I'm not going to presume a skill level, but I'm going to point out that if you want that kind of super beginner advice, these books, not just Call of Cthulhu, but these and many books have so here's how we run from soup to nuts, everything, right? When you act as keeper, you become the game moderator. Whether you're using a published scenario or creating one of your own, you alone know the story plot and the likely outcomes and solutions. Your job is to present the mystery and story during play, incidentally playing the roles of monsters or sinister ordinary people that the investigators meet. You have the responsibility for preparing and running this scenario without bias. Above all else, you should listen to your players and react to what they say and do. You get the line of, you do not have to memorize all the rules, and that's absolutely correct. Do not memorize I don't even know all the rules to D&D, and how long have I been presenting it, playing it, running it, etc. We have these reference books for a reason. And sometimes, even though there's a clearly rules as written moment, such as conducting a chase, and it gets into detail, and a fine example too. Not only do you get the rules laid out, there's an ongoing story written regarding the rules, for an example. And you say, you know what though, in this circumstance, that ain't gonna cut it. I'm gonna run it my way. Well, you know what? It is your story, and so you do it your way. And there are many adventures that people have made that are introductory or simple, kind of like with D&D. Run a mod. See how a printed example would play out. Adjust it on the fly if you feel comfortable doing so or want to. And go from there. There's one in the back of this Keeper book for free. There's one you can download from Chaosium, and there's plenty of other things too. So this is more about etiquette and the approach and finding players. I will trust you to read this if you don't know. Ask questions if there's something specific, because myself and others here will be happy to give you advice. I don't need to read this on video for you all. This, however, is an important thing to consider for a game like Call of Cthulhu. Setting the tone. The tone, especially in a game, and even if it's Dungeons and Dragons and you want to run a horror or a mystery, the tone is important. And I succumb to a foible that is listed here. Consider what sort of game you want to run. You can aim for high tension, over-the-top schlock horror, or a pulp action romp. Having said that, the default mode for this game is intended to be horror with some action scenes thrown into the mix. You should decide as a group whether the game is to be serious or jocular. Comedy and horror are good bedfellows, and the switch from one to the other is used to great effect in many movies. However, too much comedy lessens the horror. That way, or the way you act as keeper reinforces or undermines the tone. where I mean, I don't know if it's a mistake or a slip up. I know that I can be intense with my concepts or deliveries, but man, do I love puns. And it's hard sometimes to hold them back, and many times I probably don't. And that can distract. And when atmosphere, especially, is a big part of the tension, the buildup, the thrill that leads, the terror that leads to the horror. Jokes from you as the one facilitating the story, or even the players, can let the air out before you've had that scary pop. But it does just talk to your players about the tone of the game, and see where you want to take it, or if that's going to be a direction that's right for you all. Ivalon, there's a lot that I wanted to do, and maybe I could do a behind the scenes and what was left on the cutting room floor. There was a lot that I really wanted to do. Yeah, Dolo, the most important theme to me in the Cthulhu mythos is that these creatures do not care about you. Demons want something from you. Vampires want something from you. Even zombies want something from you. And we'll actually touch on that here in a little bit. You're 2 steps ahead of me, Dolo. The Yith, the Star Spawn, the Elder Gods, none of them care particularly about humanity one way or the other. If they harm you, it's because it's the path to least resistance in accomplishing their goals. And if they relent, it's not because of conscience. Yeah. Now, this is also something that can come up in a game like Vampire the Masquerade, in Call of Cthulhu, places that maybe are set in a real. Although, obviously, we hear about controversies or controversies or aspects of even, supposedly far-flung fantasy games that, are sort of torn back, kicking and screaming by people to some real basis. For the Lady in Red that was presented, I had hoped that by showcasing that, there is a way that you can touch upon that. And even, Vampire the Masquerade was just very overt. You are playing a monster, and you're going to do bad things because you're not really a good guy. And let alone in modern society and in the things that we clutch our pearls at now, that people 20, 30 years ago didn't, let alone 100 years ago, going back to the 1920s. Or even further, by the way, and we'll touch it on this. Welcome, Dark Wolf. Welcome, Raiders. And this, to take a sidestep, this is Down Darker Trails, which is an Old West themed take on Call of Cthulhu. So if you go back, if you have things even touching on a semblance of reality, Cyberpunk Red very much leans into this too. You might encounter distasteful historical themes because the people we are now are not the people that we would have been 100 years ago. And the people 100 years from now are probably going to look back at us and think that we are uncouth monsters. It's how it is. And it's how it will always be. So if you bring this stuff up, Oklahoma, there's plenty of third rails that can be touched upon. Do what's going to be right for the story that you want to tell with your friends or family at your table. You know, and if you want to exclude it, even if it's not realistic to the era, that's your call. If everyone is fine with it, cool. Suspend disbelief or whatever, exclude things or whatever. If you lean into it, realize it's a game. And actually, by looking at hard stuff like this, it might actually make you more thoughtful and empathetic to a conflict, a plight, a source of ire, a hot topic, or whatever, right? So here it's similar. Talk to your players, the humans, presumably humans, piloting the characters, for creating them. Look them over, make sure it'll fit. Because as much as you might want to play, a 1950s early computer scientist, that is not going to jive if you want to run an Old West Call of Cthulhu, where you're lucky if your small city has electricity running to it. Kind of a thing. But there's great advice here. I'm not glazing over it because it's not interesting. It is, and this is good for newcomers, or not just to role playing, but even people to the system. And you'll see things that are applied. The random investigators. Some scenarios, especially one shots, will work with a random mix of investigators. What do you think the Lady in Red was? There was the chance for some collusion, but effectively the Lady in Red was a one-shot, just over 3 parts. And the investigators were created in a disparate way and brought together through the contrivances of fate and storytelling. So this is all here. Again, we're in chapter 10. If you're reading along at home, this is page 188. And this is also going to lean into, customizing some things. And please do read who your investigators are. And don't be afraid to make some customizations, even to a printed story, in order to help immerse the players through their characters into that system. Hey, great Dark Wolf. And what is your goal for NaNoWriMo? Oh, that's a tasty snack, Kragar. Non-player characters, of course, if you're the keeper, the one facilitating, you're going to be the one running everyone else in the world. There's very good advice here for, bringing those characters a little bit more to life, making them a part of the setting, a part of the story, through this as well. A good note, remember to present non-player characters in a believable way. The use of accents and mannerisms can quickly establish a character's personality in the minds of the players. So yeah, speak with an accent. Or if the sheriff is the one talking, always make sure you're scratching your cheek. And everyone will see that it's the sheriff is the one always scratching his cheek when he talks. It could be simple stuff like that. And you don't even need to explain why the sheriff scratches his cheek. Or it might prompt that they ask. And that is adding to the story. So this part is great. Just straight up advice on here. Here's a topic, and here's how to work it into the game. If you've not presented a game before, read through it. Adopt it. You don't have to memorize it. It's advice. In fact, I forgot to bring it with me. I actually have a keeper rule, like a miniature advice book. I'll show it on tomorrow's stream. This is delving into looking over the backstory. Your players are doing a fantastic job for you. They're investigators. with their backgrounds written out, not just what their strength is or the how the percentile of accounting they have. That it can play into it a bit. Who are the characters? Where are they from? What do they like? Do they have something that's a memento, something that's valued or treasured? This is what will really sink the character into the setting and draw the player, and you'll get so much more enjoyment. This touches back on rolling dice, generally when to or not to, setting difficulty levels. This is stuff that has been touched on before. Ultimately, you as the keeper are the arbiter. Pushing the roll is to push the horror. I often express it as a double or nothing in The Lady in Red, because if you fail again, the consequences are more than failure. A failed pushed roll is the verge or even the burgeoning or breakthrough of a horrific event. Pacing the game, I will read through this. Your role is like that of an orchestra conductor. You set the tempo. Giving a good pace to the game can be essential, keeping everyone interested and excited. Some scenes have a natural end and the game progresses organically. Others have the risk of becoming overextended and dull. And I've been guilty of this. I am not without that sin. Try to keep things moving, but bear in mind that sometimes the players need a chance to catch their breath and review the situation. Combats and chases demand fast-paced action and quick decisions from yourself and the players. Sometimes the players may disagree on how to proceed. The two players get caught up in a discussion about whether to stay in the musty old cellar or to make a break for freedom. You can take a step back and give them time to talk and work things out. If the players are animated, you can take that as a sure sign they're enjoying the game. If players are arguing about rules, then you should offer arbitration. Otherwise, just sit back and rest your voice a little while. If everyone's enjoying themselves, there's no problem. I'm highlighting that. If everyone's enjoying themselves, there's no problem. Doesn't matter what the rules as written, rules as intended, the spontaneous interpretation. If you're having fun, you're having fun, and that's the point of playing a game, especially a role-playing game. A key aspect of your job as keeper is to build an atmosphere of tension, and the way you pace the game is key to this. And remember, the default is horror with bursts of action. You may start with a low-key opening and take a slow boil approach, gradually building the tension as the game reaches climax. Alternatively, you may kick the game off with a bang, starting the story in media res, guns blazing, then alternate between tense dramatic scenes and high action scenes. Keep your finger on the pulse of the game, allowing it to slow down at times, but always be ready to draw a scene to a close and push the game on. I am happy that this rulebook does enforce and re-encourage just get the story out, keep it moving. If the investigators don't find the clue here where they're supposed to, you can just deny it and wait until they come back to the exact spot and do so. But ultimately, you're here for a story. And maybe there's still an organic way you can get that clue out to them, or to guide them back around. Or it comes up in a different way elsewhere at a different time, but the clue is still there and it's still picked up upon. And it's sort of the game for you as the keeper is the plate spinning, the management of the pace of the clues that get leaked out. That's a part of your fun challenge. And are you going to mess up sometimes? Absolutely. In any role-playing game. I can't tell you how many times I've messed up in D&D, and that's supposed to be my bread and butter. It's okay to do. And with that permission, then, reach out. Try a system like Call of Cthulhu. Challenge yourself. And if you step in it, laugh with everyone else at the table, adjudicate a way forward, and keep pushing forward. Make those memories and have fun. Now, I'm not going to... problems with players, you can read about it here, and the suggestions might very well be viable for you and your group. I'm not going to worry about that. It doesn't hurt to bring that up. Like in our Discord, we have a mentor network, and you can ask questions if you want a more live response from people who have experience and can help you. Problems with players, it's fine to include, good to consider. Might even be something that you've never considered at your table before. Worth a read, but I'm not going to read it here, as that's delving into some, I guess, basic advice, generic things that are not going to necessarily be a part of specifically crafting this horror/mystery. But this is good facilitator orientation to role-playing games. Luck, winning an idea roll, losing them. How do you disseminate the information? Ways to go about perception rolls. You could call these kind of almost a set of sub-rules or an alternate take on them, because you are the one who's calling for the rolls, and they have to be made. But how they're made, it was handled before in the previous chapters. Is some sort of perception or spot hidden always necessary, or a roll at all? If you want the obscured clues to be more than just a narrative thing, and you want to have it be a little bit more crunchy, there's advice for all that here. We're on 202. Consequences for it in case you need a prompt. Because you like that idea. Yeah, if someone fails something, it brings the horror closer to that barrier of liminality. And so the book has you. Ah, yes, but that's how it works in reality. This can be a universal thing. This is not even just a Call of Cthulhu in a real, environment. You'll hear this in Vampire, you'll hear this in D&D, you'll hear this in Starfinder and Pathfinder, you'll hear this in Zweihander, you'll hear this in Witcher. When using your judgment over what might happen in the game, try to balance a sense of reality with what you think will create a dramatic situation. If it's clear that being a slave to verisimilitude is going to produce a dull outcome, then try being more creative. This is not to imply that you should strive to be unrealistic. However, if you find yourself justifying a universally undesirable event with the phrase, "but that's how it works in reality," you should ask yourself if you couldn't do something more dramatically creative. A shotgun blast, for example, may not send a person flying back through the air in reality, but if you like the idea of it, then, where's the harm? Yeah, Ivalon, there was a lot, like idea rolls and such. Again, there was a lot of things that have rules or considerations that I left on the cutting room floor, for sake of the pacing or fitting to the pre-contrived three session format. But I in this, because I want to discuss the storytelling, there, the idea rolls are roles and rules. They're there to read about. I really don't want to get into rules discussions in this part. We can touch upon it, of course, but I don't want to review it as a rule set or feel like it has to be something that must be implemented or rolled upon. Now, this is going to touch upon something that I believe it was Ivalon. It is something that might be overlooked for those who haven't played a style of horror game like this. In a fantasy game, if I describe a disgusting creature, a gibbering mouther, coming at you, that may not necessarily induce any sort of madness, panic, or a sense of bent reality. It might almost be expected that creatures like that just exist in this world. And maybe they do. A lot more commonplace. It is a fantasy world, after all. And especially if that game does have a tactical combat element and, very immediately... Uh-oh. Dork Tales coming in strong with that raid. Thank you so much. Welcome everyone to the Hero Zone. We are conducting a Call of Cthulhu workshop where we're getting into the story presentation elements. If you've never played Call of Cthulhu, welcome. This is not an in-depth rules discussion where we're getting into the minutia of the crunch of the game. This is perhaps for those who've never played this game or not really run. Uh-oh. Thank you very much, Ashan? Or is it Ashan Windsong? Thank you for the follow. Yes, the crunch of Cthulhu. Well, thank you very much for the follow, Ashan. And everyone from Dork Tales, please do... hi, Awkward Mancer. Share what was going on in your channel. You rated in. Table Talk, what was going on? Give your pitch. You're welcome to do so. But for those who might only have experience with like D&D or sort of high fantasy settings, and you've never run a horror or a mystery or something a little grittier or something, that can be a part of why maybe you've never considered playing Call of Cthulhu. And so I love these kinds of workshops because I want to make it presentable, and I want to make it so that much of... Oh, Arwen, thank you. Much of what you do in these other games, or if you've never played a role-playing game, but you've read books or seen a movie, where you can take those ideas and you still can present them comfortably at the table and now run a game of Call of Cthulhu without ever having read Lovecraft or other, cosmic horror style books, anything that's in the mythos. It's good to read, but it's not required reading. And I don't want titles like Alien RPG or Call of Cthulhu to turn any of you off from those systems because, well, I've only seen the first Alien movie and I haven't seen the others. So, I don't know, maybe I'm not a big enough fan to play, or, I just don't know enough about Alien to feel comfortable running Alien RPG. Get rid of that idea. How many sessions of D&D have you played where there's not been a dungeon nor a dragon? What? None of you have read the Silmarillion? None of you have read the early Conan comic books? Well, how dare you play Dungeons and Dragons not having read the Silmarillion of all things? And so, yes, actually not knowing about the mythos makes you perfect. That is actually a very powerful thing to bring into a game. The rumors of Dungeons and Dragons being in D&D do exist, Redhead. But as I was saying, so if you are coming from a high fantasy or tactical combat style role-playing game, then you might go, oh, a Star Spawn. Those have 305 hit points, and their AC is 17. And watch out because they have a nasty AOE psychic attack. In games more like this, as soon as you give Cthulhu hit points, you have completely lost the meaning of Cthulhu, of a cosmic horror, an eldritch horror. Well, Petite, being an owner of a friendly local game store, it's my job to introduce games to people, to teach how to play them, how to approach them, and in a way that's actually like it's meaningful. It's right there. It's relevant, and it's obvious, right? There's no contrivances, no set phrases, no, no fluffy whatever. It is what it is. And I love when people cross that threshold into the store and maybe they try a new game or they ask questions about something they're not familiar with. Whether or not they actually pick it up, I mean, if they do, awesome, thank you for the support. And if they don't, man, someone opened their mind to something new and considered something different. And so it's my job to tell you it's okay to not have read, a plethora of books before. It's fine to make a mistake in a new game that you're playing. And for a game like this, I mean, are there kind of hit points? Yeah, you can go and find stats for monsters. But in the concept of horror, in a slasher film, the killer is just a human. Why is everyone so scared? It's just a human, Why? Because there is that imperceivable, like that thin veil of the scream mask, of the ghost face mask, and the cheap Halloween costume, the hockey mask and whatever maintenance outfit or something, the red and green sweater with the dirty hat and the claws. Now, some of those are not human, but they look like it. But still, there's this ultimate feeling of, I'm not able to fully understand what or who this thing is. And therein is where a lot of the terror can build into horror. If you're fighting 6 skeletons in Pathfinder, that's probably not as horrific an experience as fighting 6 skeletons in Call of Cthulhu. Probably. Maybe not always. And why would that be? In part, it's the tone. In part, it's because your character in Call of Cthulhu, should never, almost never, if ever, expect a skeleton. Like, that's in the pulp comics. Or, that's in the whatever. Or, that's an end-time biblical thing. There we go. That's the spirit. And in this case, it doesn't matter if the skeleton has 6 hit points. That skeleton should have 0 and not be standing there. That's the fun. That's what you can lean into very easily. Yeah, what's animating them? Necromancy. What's that? So, a lot of very, very good advice in this chapter on facilitating, and there are rules, like as Ivalon brought up. As Evelyn brought up, like there's rules to prompt ideas, like idea rolls, which act kind of like clue tokens or other things in board game versions. And just, well, if someone feels stuck, what do? Or how can you refine an idea? And so it's maybe extra rules that the keeper can keep in mind and maybe employ or adjust. They're here, and I do want you to read them. But I haven't touched on the minutia of the rules because I want to talk about the concept of delivering a story through Call of Cthulhu. The horror genre can be a lot of fun, right down to pounding hearts and sweating brows. It is part of human nature to find pleasure in being scared, as long as being scared is not for real. Of course, actually scaring anyone is rare in a game, consisting of dice and paper, but be assured it can happen. The game's setting is ostensibly that of the real world, with which we are intimately familiar. Hi, Tio. As you play, strive to make the world realistic so your players feel at home in it. If a monster appeared in real life, most of us would be scared. But a player is unlikely to be scared if a monster enters through his or her investigator's front door. The player knows this is a horror game and is expecting monsters. Instead of using a monster to scare a player, try to confound the player's expectations of how things in the real world work. Consider the following event, for example. The investigator says goodbye to his wife as she leaves the house for work. And then, 5 minutes later, his wife walks down the stairs in her dressing gown. Don't provide an explanation. If you can induce cognitive dissonance, holding two conflicting ideas simultaneously, in the player, you will open the door to fear as the player's mind struggles to make sense of the situation. We get scared when we can't make sense of things, especially when those things that don't make sense are the mundane, everyday things that we know we should understand. And then there's a note about pacing as well. Simple things like that explanation are great ways to actually have horror and fear at your table. Now, there's some other things you could do if this was a heads-up game in person. You know, friends and family around a table, a group at the local store, the library, wherever, right? Because now you're face-to-face. And maybe you, I don't know, you can change the lighting. You can have some music playing in the background. Things to help create the scene, not just of the game you're playing, but there in the room. You can pass notes. I've read all sorts of clever stuff on inducing that kind of, building terror in the players. And, in a sense, that can be simulated here online. I mean, what's your all's expectations? I mean, look, this is here we have a channel on Twitch. I'm talking to you, I'm talking to you through a camera. I'm very brightly lit. The volume is whatever it's at. And so, do you lose out through this medium on something that could be, that could build to horror or a sense of suspense? It's the same principle that applies, not just in the narration of the character's wife leaving and the character's wife coming downstairs, or if we're playing heads up, to you could even simulate that at the table. Let's say that a friend of yours, is not playing, but knows that in that session, in order to help raise up everyone at the table, the human players, senses, you two have coordinated off screen to wear the same thing. And you say, all right, yeah, well, you handled that well. And I'll tell you, we're going to investigate, is that your wife or not in a moment? I need to get up and grab a drink. And then that person goes out to grab a drink in the kitchen, and walking in through the other door is the friend who in the dimly lit room is dressed exactly the same as the keeper. Sits down and, as if nothing happened, looks around in wonderment. You can do fun stuff like that too. Now, through a medium like this, you can play into it. Some music. There's other things as well. While we do have more barriers between us than our characters that are intimately close through the contact of living in the same area, the city, profession, caught in the same horror, or those if we were playing in a kitchen. And so what do? You defy the expectation. Uh-oh. Welcome, Raiders. Hello! Everyone, welcome to the Hero Zone. Shout out to Opcost Games. And what were you all up to tonight? Please share. We're going into storytelling through Call of Cthulhu and presenting horror and mystery. So, if we're defying the norm, and not just saying like, oh, there's a skeleton, it's bones. Well, alright, I mean, yeah, that could be creepy. But, who is that person? In character or in the room? Well, if you're gonna... Bonsai is an amazing... Oh, that is such a fun and even kind of a relaxing game. I hope the trees that you all built looked... did you take like pictures or screen caps or something? If so, I'd love to see how you grew out your bonsais. Your trees were not good. Well, that's really cool you play board games. This channel's an extension of a friendly local game store. So, RPGs, board games, all that stuff, you're in good company here. Yeah, thank you for dropping by. Right? It's my job to not just sell stuff through the store. I mean, don't get me wrong. Thank you for all of you who purchase through your friendly local game store and small business and everything. But it's also my job to teach, and that's what we're doing. So, how can you defy the norm, even through a medium like this? Oh, Jamie. Okay, Jamie. Yeah. Well, what's the norm? I mean, I could, like, turn up the... I could put creepy music on in the background. Here, I have creepy music. This is called Village of the Damned. Ooh. Okay, that might work. Does this create those feelings of growing terror or horror? It helps. Oh, yeah, you'll have 1 minute to post after the bot gives you permission. Well, you take what is the norm of the situation. There should not be skeletons, and now there is. Or, I said goodbye to my wife, and why did she just come downstairs? And on a platform like this, It could be the music. I could lower the lighting. I could... I could do that too. Even though this is a brightly lit room, I can still underlight my face and speak in accents and do other things that in this moment, on this platform, through this medium, are not what you're used to. And maybe, just maybe, the unblinking, unflinching, eye-to-eye contact is itself a part of the unsettling presentation of your story. Perhaps. Why doesn't he blink? I don't know. But now I will. Gotta make up for lost time. Yeah. Now it's not quite as terrifying, but sometimes I have a cat jump up on the back of the seat, or whoop, she'll come over and say hi. So have fun with it. You have permission to speak with accents and to stand up and make yourself look taller. If everyone at your table is sitting down, if you stand up, you are a giant or a figure of authority. And then, of course, there is advice on what happens if an investigator dies in the course of the story. And, well, how do you at least have that landing you can walk away from with the ending? And this was something even I was concerned about. I'm always nervous about, hopefully I can stick the landing. So the book has a lot that is in here. A lot to consider. I was in kissing distance. Ooh woo. Here you go, Evelyn. I'm gonna give you an ooh woo. Oh, I'm taking a look at the picture of your of the tree you built for bonsai. That's not a bad tree. That's not a bad op cost. You're fine. Uh-oh, Sierra Echo's looking mighty sensuous. Since you was up, can you get me actually, it probably is about that time for a little bit of a break. Because what I want to do, we'll create a scenario in tomorrow's workshop. Tonight we're talking about the concepts, not necessarily the structure. Structure is after we set this tone, we become familiar. And so what I want to do is delve into not just what the Call of Cthulhu book says horror is, or how to present it with, honest suggestions, or the crunch, the rules, the mechanics of the game, because it's there and it can work. But I want to talk more conceptually. And so when we come back, we will very much get into setting that tone, talking about the pacing, and the elements that you should consider for a game. And yes, the topic is Call of Cthulhu, but do this for Vampire the Masquerade. Do this for Alien RPG. Do this for even for Dungeons and Dragons or Pathfinder, where you wish to present a more suspenseful, leading to a building terror, and then the crescendo of horror. Anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself. Everyone, let's take a 5-minute break, refresh ourselves. Opcost, thank you so much for visiting us here. You found a very good community. If you want to talk about board games, you and others, please do join our Discord as well. In fact, if you like board games, I'm going to be doing a big prize event with plenty of board games involved. And the more the merrier in that regard as well. Because I love them too. And I want to get them out to as many of you as possible to enjoy the fun times at the table, the creativity and such. And we keep, unless it's explicitly marked otherwise, we keep things PG-13 around here. No worse than that. Just like we ask people to conduct themselves in the store. So hopefully I haven't embarrassed you in front of your community. And I appreciate you coming in with that raid. All right, let's take 5, everyone. And when we come back, we are going to talk about the concept of horror itself, not just Lovecraftian, cosmic, eldritch, etc. I'll see you all soon. Or wait, what do I say in a horror movie? I'll be right back.